welcome back to Road to Novel with AM Cal. This is me uploading a little later than I expected. We just had some life things come up the past couple weeks and we're really super busy and just some unexpected turns of events, but everything is a-okay now and I'm finally but rest assured everything is a-okay now and I'm finally back to share the good news that I have reached 22,000 words in my steampunk fantasy novel that I've been writing. Yay! So, if you're like me and you're at this stage of your novel, first of all, welcome and congratulations. This is a pivotal point in your novel writing process. I know I had a video for 10,000 words, but I was super excited to get to 20,000 words because I feel like that so much more kind of happens and there's so many more like kind of slippery slopes to be aware of and navigate. So now we're getting to the really fun and kind of messy part. So without further ado, let's get into our Act 2. Okay guys, so sorry for the slight camera shift. I was having technical difficulties with my microphone. It hasn't really been properly secured, so I'm just going to go ahead and hold it for the rest of the time. Plus, I kind of like just having something to kind of hold on to as I discuss. So, and thank you again for being patient as I get my lighting and my camera angles just kind of down, and I'm playing with things a lot. We're experimenting right now. So this is a really fun time in my YouTube stage. So yeah, just bear with me and grab a cup of coffee or some tea like I just had. And we will talk about our 20,000 word mark. I actually kind of like this with holding the microphone. Hopefully it's not too damaging on the ears. So on to Act 2. So number 1, which I kind of stated earlier, which may be kind of obvious, is let it be messy. This is the fun part where you can really experiment and you're already past the setup, you're really getting into the action, and everything's just gonna happen all like in stages as you progress. This section is called the fun and game section according to Blake Snyder's Save the Cat methodology, and it's when just kind of the meat and potatoes of the film or the story happens. So things go off the rails, characters go like on little side quests, just kind of calamity ensues, especially like in comedies. This happens a lot with just everything just going awry and then kind of, coming back to the center while progressing the plot. The plot, the plot, not the clot. And it's just a time like to just kind of really fill in what's going to happen before you get to the third act. So let it be messy. I'm trying to remind myself of this too because I have noticed that the writing for me and just the progression is getting a bit messier and sloppier as I go. I know what's going to happen. I know what my outline says, but I also know that it's just going to have to be a bit messy while I figure out the nuances and the little just cogs in the machine of everything and filling in things that maybe I didn't think of in the outline or that I'm changing. That brings me to point 2. Don't be afraid to stray. I've talked in earlier videos how it is super important to have an outline, but in Act 2, you may notice that your outline is kind of not really holding fast as it kind of used to. It's been a good guide for you so far, but now you're ready to experiment. And while there are some really hardcore planners out there that want to stick exactly to their outline, which I was kind of trying to be one of those. But regardless, I always notice with me at least, and maybe this is not everybody, but I always stray at least a little bit, even if I know exactly what's going to happen. Don't be afraid to stray because you might find like new twists or just things that just kind of work better, because I think that you could have it all planned in the outline, but maybe something just works better or more organically as you kind of write something a bit different. So don't be afraid to stray. Of course, like don't go like totally off the deep end, like use your outline as a guide. But new things are going to come up, and that's the fun of it. It's part of the discovery process. Number 3, and I should have put this first, don't give up. I think that in the past, I have given up around the 10, 15, 20,000 word mark. This time I don't feel like giving up like I previously had in other drafts, but I also think that a lot of that had to do with the fact that I didn't outline correctly or just very well. I didn't plan enough. This time I feel much more kind of concrete and centered with what I'm doing and where I'm going. So if you're kind of feeling like you're a little bit stuck, or you're like, wow, Act 2 seems so overwhelming because we're through the setup part, guardrails are kind of coming off, and now we're just kind of exploring but expanding on what our premise kind of promises, or the promise of the premise, trying to stick to it, but also trying to have fun. It is overwhelming. I think that Act 2 as a writer is probably one of the hardest things to write. I know that screenwriters often, just refer to it like as a black hole, or like, the messy middle, as I think I said before, but like it is a messy middle because it is daunting for a lot of writers, and it just is the part of the story that's going to probably carry the most weight and have the most stakes and be the most easy to mess up. So, but don't worry, just don't give up. You can come back and revise later. My novel will have to be very heavily revised, and I'm kind of telling myself that because I am a perfectionist and I want to like edit everything then and there. But at the end of the day, nothing's set in stone. It's just pen on paper, or like clicking on paper with typing, and you could always come back and like revise later. You should, so don't worry about it. Number 4, go bigger. And this could refer to maybe going past your, not concept, but just like going a little bit bigger than maybe you planned in the outline, taking bigger risks maybe, or maybe the planned risks that you've had. Just really go in on what's going to happen. Stick to your pacing, but just really don't be afraid to explore and get into the weeds a little bit of your concept. Like with mine, since it is a steampunk fantasy and I'm past the portal section, like she's already gone into the second world, I'm really going kind of bigger on the detail than I had initially planned. I'm going kind of bigger on like the scenery a little bit, mainly with people that she's meeting. I'm getting a little bit more into just like specifics and making it really kind of like a little bit more advanced than it used to be. Fun not tip, but just like side tangent a bit. I was watching a lot of Star Trek before writing my second act. It definitely was actually kind of encouraging for me to kind of see how those writers and set designers went in on like the world building for their project, and just kind of giving me the encouragement, or like just the motivation and the inspiration to go a little bit bigger. I'd always planned to go bigger, like because this is a second fantasy world, but as far as like some character design stuff, I did kind of go a little bit more fantastical than I had planned. Number 5, don't neglect the subplots. I think it can be easy to kind of forget about subplots a little bit, and when you're trying to weave in the main plot, your subplots should hopefully happen kind of organically to the story. Through your characters. It can be kind of tricky, but I feel like a lot of subplots actually happen naturally, unless you're like writing a mystery. That's more crucial, I think. A mystery or crime, probably really crucial with the subplots. I mean, subplots are always crucial, I feel like, but maybe in genres like fantasy or romance, maybe there's a little bit more room to play. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, but maybe that is the case. I mean, there should be mysteries in your story that are keeping the audience intrigued. Number 6 with the don't neglect the subplots is remember your side characters. Maybe it can be easy in this part to kind of forget about the characters that you've introduced in the first act, or maybe you're introducing new characters in the second act. Like, I have a side character from the first act that is going into the second act with my character. There were other side characters in the first act that I really liked that did not end up in the second part of my story just yet, just because it is going into a fantastical world, kind of like Alice in Wonderland, a portal fantasy. So there was one side character that made it into the second act with my main character, and I find him really interesting, so I'm having to figure out how to bring him back in. I mean, I already know how I'm going to do it, but like, you're just trying to make sure that you don't neglect them for too long, or just let them kind of go off and do their own thing for too long. This kind of reminds me of when I was reading like Lord of the Rings again last year, kind of for the first time in years since I was a kid. Just how Gandalf kind of like goes away and then comes back and is like, I have to go do something, and then he comes back. Just kind of funny. It just kind of reminds me of that. So don't let that be too much of that. Like, don't forget about your side characters. Because if you have side characters like mine, they are kind of important to my main character's arc and story. Number 7, clarify the antagonist. Another part, and this is what I learned when I was doing film school, is the antagonist is just as important as the protagonist. Before I started drafting this version of my novel, I knew who the antagonist was. I think the antagonist was the first character I really had figured out. And then did I say protagonist? The antagonist was the first character I really had figured out. I knew who my protagonist was, but as far as like motivation and like really trying to move the stakes along, I knew who the antagonist was kind of more in depth first. That's not critical, everyone's process is different, but we did talk a lot about in my film classes, like how important that the antagonist is. It has to be just as strong because it's got to contend with a strong antagonist. Ideally, the worldview should naturally kind of oppose or maybe be like an inversion of the protagonist's worldview. Typically, the protagonist and the antagonist have two very different philosophies on life and what's right. And that can be really tricky to figure out, especially if you're thinking of the villain like as the bad guy. Of course, like, you know, the antagonist is your bad guy in a sense, but you should also not empathize with them. I mean, maybe a little bit, like understand who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. Why is very important. I feel like that I couldn't really start writing until I figured out my antagonist's why, even more so than the protagonist's why. And it did take me a while to get there, but once I figured it out, things kind of started making more sense. So make sure that your antagonist is clear, opposing the protagonist, and has a good why to what they're doing within the context of the plot. Number 8, to go off of that, to directly oppose the first one, not really, I'm kidding, but don't forget who the protagonist is. I think especially like in fantasy stories, I'm reading one right now that's currently doing this, is you can change POV in your different chapters. So like in the one that I'm reading right now, you have the protagonist and then you have another character and switching back and forth. And I've read a lot of fantasy novels that do either between two different characters or they have the whole cast of characters that's bouncing back and forth through the different chapters. It just depends on what your structural style is, I guess, with the POVs or the point of views of your character. Like for mine, I've chosen to keep it kind of third person limited is what it's referred to, where I have a overlook of my character in real time. Like I say, she does this, she does that, but I stay limited to her. Like if she's not in a scene, I won't be able to narrate because I've kind of locked myself into just having her as my central point of view. And you don't have to do that. You can definitely do multiple, and that's probably a whole other topic. But with my character, I am sticking with one, just her perspective, hopefully, making sure that I don't forget that she's the main protagonist and the main point of interest for the audience. And I say this because there have been a lot of screenplays that I've written, drafts that I've written over the years, as I've written full feature film screenplays, and they've always had like a messy act 2. I forgot to mention this in the first part, like with the messy middle, is that I think my act 2 was always the weakest, first of all. But second of all, I would sometimes really kind of back off the interest of the protagonist and maybe take too much interest in a side character. Because there were several scripts that I'd written where the side character just was more interesting to me. And actually, funny enough, this novel that I'm writing now, it was a feature film screenplay that I wrote. So I've already written the story technically, but now it's very different and like I feel like much better. But the side character in the film version was a lot more interesting, and my protagonist really took a backseat, and I ended up not knowing what to do with her, especially in Act 2, but that's changed, and it's gotten better. So don't forget who your protagonist is. It can be easy to slip. Number 9, keep your ending in mind. And I put in parentheses, the third act should be kind of solid. In essence, make sure that you know where you're going still and keep on that track. Like, you can stray a little bit, like I said before, but make sure that it's going to add up to a third act that makes sense. And ideally, you should already have your third act in mind, like I do with outlining. I've known for, I think, the beginning of my outlining process how the story was going to end, and you should ideally too. Again, everyone's process is different. This is just kind of an insight into mine. If you do something different, that's great. Like, I'm not, like, saying that you shouldn't do something different at all. And again, at the end of the day, this is all subjective, right? Like, everyone's got their own journey and their own process. But I think it is a good idea to have your third act in mind, at least, like, the titular parts of it that are going to happen, so that you can keep Act 2 on track. Did I switch that? Keep Act 3 in mind with the titular points, and keep Act 2 on track to get there. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to have your third act be unrecognizable from your messy middle, your second act. Finally, for right now, we have number 10, go in on your world building here. And this is for me, especially because I'm writing like a portal fantasy and I'm now in the fantasy world, even though I did have some world building because it's also kind of historical in my first act. This is where your world building will shine, and the world should operate as another character in and of itself. When you think about books, again, to use Lord of the Rings as an example, the backdrop of that world and the whole world is in itself a whole character. You have the brooding mountains of Mordor. You have the mysterious and harrowing mines of Moria. You have the talking trees. Each setting is a character and provides a different challenge for the protagonist and the characters. So just going on the world building here with what's appropriate to your story, because your story will be unique, and you could definitely use inspiration from other works of literature or art or movies. Like, for example, for me, like Star Trek, I was watching recently, and I was kind of thinking about like, oh, this is how they built the world. This is what it looks like. Each kind of episode is a different part of the universe that plays a character that presents a new challenge to our characters. So yeah, just go in all in on the world building. Don't hold back, because again, you can always like revise it later and cut out things. Provide more detail, even if it's a little bit redundant. So that is 10 tips so far.